So yeah, welcome to Math of Evolution. This is a special topics course. Might ultimately fold into a regular offering, possibly at the graduate level. So this is kind of a bit of a prototype testing of that. My name is Ben Ashby. For those who don't know me, you can call me Ben. That's fine. My email address is here. If you want to talk to me about drop me an email about the course. If you could just put Math 495 or Math 795 as applies to you in the subject, that would just really help me to filter things through. This, like I said, is the first time this course is run, so brand new set of notes and everything. If you do spot any typos or anything like that, please just let me know. It will help me to iron those out. If you think that you've spotted a typo in like the notes that you've downloaded, go and check, if you could, the Canvas version first, because sometimes I might have updated those and you might have just missed the email or announcement or something like that. Okay. Okay, for today, it's going to be pretty chill. We're just going to talk a little bit about some principles of evolution. We're going to talk about the course structure, how you can hopefully succeed in this, and then also it's a good opportunity for you guys to ask any questions that you might have. So first of all, what is evolution? So I've got three questions here. What is evolution? What is natural selection? And why use math to study evolution? What I'd like for you to do is to take a few minutes just to chat to the person next to you or in a small group of you guys and talk through these different questions and come up with some answers. Okay, so get to know each other, have a little chat for the first few minutes and try and answer these questions. Okay. Okay, let's see what you guys think. So, first of all, what is evolution? Any ideas? What's your intuition about what is evolution? By the way, in this course, I will be asking you to answer questions. I'm just going to do a very quick thing. Can everyone raise their hands? Just checking that everyone can raise their hands. Okay. What color is the sky? Blue. Okay, good. You can all speak. You can all raise your hands. That's great. So what is evolution? Silence. That's more than you've already answered, so I'm going to take on you.
I just said change over time.
Change over time. Okay. Any other ideas about what is evolution? Don't be afraid. No? Okay, so evolution is, we can think about biological evolution as a specific form of evolution. There's different types of evolution. Usually we're thinking about biological evolution, but really that change over time. In the context of biological evolution, it's a change in heritable characteristics of populations over successive generations. Okay, so jot that down. It's the change in the heritable, being a key word, characteristics of populations over successive generations. It might seem kind of obvious. Why am I going through this stuff? Well, one of the reasons I'm going through this stuff is that people maybe have a conception of evolution that's maybe perhaps a little bit narrow sometimes, or a little bit constrained to certain aspects. Okay, so what is evolution? Okay, what is natural selection then? Yep.
Well, it's kind of a model that we assume the nature is working well. In that we assume that the nature selects the species or genes or every living thing that fits more, and by fitting more, maybe we mean like more survival chance.
Okay, so survival. Okay, so you use the word select. Let's try and use not use the words that we're trying to define in there. So any other ideas about what this? Those were good answers, by the way. Those are the wrong answer.
Like if I want to modify it a little bit, if I not to use select, so whatever survives is going to like dominate other things who die. So
okay,
that's kind of what we mean by selection.
Yeah, so some differential survival. Yeah. Any other aspects of natural selection that we might think about? Yeah.
It's the survival of the best specimen.
Survival of
The best specimen.
Survival of the best specimen. Okay, so ideas about some kind of like best fit to an environment. Okay, so like I said, what is natural selection? I define it as being the differential survival I'm going to put not or, I'll put and one other thing. It's important to survive, but it's also important to what? Well, it's important for some things to die, yeah, totally. But if you want to, pass on your genes, ultimately,
Reproduce.
you need to reproduce, yeah. So survival and reproduction. People often think about the survival aspect because people think of survival of the fittest, right? That's kind of what people think about often. But the reproduction aspect matters. It doesn't matter if you live for, an organism that lives for a super, super long time. If it's not passing on its genes, nothing's going to be able to evolve, okay? So differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to differences in their characteristics. So it's actually not just important we have differential survival and reproduction on its own. It has to be somehow linked to some traits or characteristics of those individuals and ultimately those populations, right? Because you could just randomly sample, just, if you think about different colors of balls in a jar and you randomly sample those, and you could think of that as being something like a survival or reproduction process, that is just a random thing, okay? We'll talk about randomness a little bit in this course. Did anyone, actually, who's here that took Aline McPherson's course last semester? I know Mark did. You did as well. Okay, so there's stochasticity in there, right? Okay, last one here. Why use math to study evolution? Any ideas? Yeah, it's all right.
Sometimes it's hard to see evolution on a wide scale, so it's easier to use math to model what could happen.
Definitely, yeah. So some of the things, we talk about might take place over, millions of years. Kind of difficult to model those things or to experiment on them. So I'd probably say, why use math to study evolution? Why not? It's a perfectly valid process as part of the scientific method. We're going to be doing lots of mathematical modeling in this course, where we'll be taking, some biological phenomena in context of evolution. We'll be thinking about the key assumptions that we can make based on those phenomena. We'll be constructing some kind of model, typically, then doing some analysis on that model, and then interpreting that model back in the context of the real world. Can that model tell us anything fundamental about evolutionary processes? Okay, so why not? Can give important insights. Help us to model changes in populations, can be used even in the context of immediate problems in the world. Okay, so something like range expansion of mosquitoes due to climate change. That can tell us how we expect when we think about evolution, if they're able to adapt to warmer climates or if they're able to spread into different areas, how might this be impacted by evolutionary processes? We can think about even things like, I'm an infectious disease modeler, so we think about infectious diseases evolving. We had COVID-19 came into the human population and we had all of these different variants evolving, right? We can use mathematical models to try and predict which variants are going to emerge. Okay, is this variant going to, we'll talk about things called selection differentials, for example. We can talk about how quickly is this variant going to take over from this other variant. Okay, I want to go through some common myths of evolution. You guys might know some of these already, might not. But like I said, I think a lot of people have some misconceptions about evolution. And so kind of wanted to go through these things. There's also this link here I provided at the bottom. It's got loads of misconceptions about evolution. I'd encourage you to have a look at this and see, challenge yourself to see whether you also have those misconceptions. Okay, so some common myths about evolution. Evolution is just a theory. Okay, how many of you guys have heard this? Particularly in like creationism debates, like evolution is just a theory. Well, so is gravity. Okay, it's a theory in the sense of, maybe we should make this a capital T theory, right? We have a whole host of evidence. We have, paleontological evidence, from fossils. We have evidence in the lab. we can, evolve things like bacteria or microbes in the lab. We have genetics. All of these things come together. We have mathematics as well that underpins all of this. This all comes together to give us a coherent theory about how evolution unfolds and how it shaped the natural world around us. We've just kind of been through this on the previous slide. Common misconception is evolution is the same as natural selection. As you'll have noticed here, there are two different questions. What is evolution? What is natural selection? These were not identical answers, okay? So as an example, we're going to talk a little bit, but not too much in this course, about genetic drift. We've also got sexual selection as well. So genetic drift is essentially that kind of random sampling. So populations can evolve simply due to neutral processes. We're going to talk about infinite populations often, and we'll talk about deterministic models because those are a little bit simpler to work with. But in the real world, things are finite, there's noise, things are sampled randomly. Therefore, you end up having this process of genetic drift. Like I said, sampling those different balls out of a jar. One person samples them, another person samples them, you'll get typically different numbers of different colors. So the same kind of process occurs in the real world. Bug flies in here, I happen to swat it, that one's not going to pass on its genes. Okay, that's a random effect. Okay, so we have those random effects. Sexual selection as well. I talked about this idea of survival and reproduction in terms of processes that are important to evolution. So things like peacock's tail, why does it have this brilliant display? That's all part of sexual selection, so differential mating opportunities. Okay, evolution maximizes survival. I've just said reproduction matters. During this course, we'll talk a little bit about trade-offs. Typically, organisms can't be great at everything. You might find that some organisms are able to survive a very long time, but they reproduce at a low level. You can think of some of this as like resource allocation. So maybe they can allocate their resources to their longevity, whereas others might allocate resources to producing more offspring. Which of those two is better? Well, it depends on the scenario. Okay, and that's one of the kind of things that we can do with modeling. We can try to understand when do we expect say organisms to invest in their longevity, or when do we expect them to invest in reproduction? Okay, how about evolution always results in progress? This idea of some kind of progress. Who's seen the I guess it's a cartoon of apes growing into man? Yeah, it's like the classical thing that people think of maybe when they think of evolution. This idea of some kind of progress. This links in with this one down here as well, with more complex organisms have evolved more. That's not true. I mean, we can also talk about what is progress. What do we mean when we talk about progress? Humans are clearly very successful, but so are bacteria, so are viruses. We might be more complex than them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have evolved more. Okay. Evolution or natural selection always acts for the good of the species. This is a very common one. Good of the species, good of the population. This is definitely not true. Typically acts at the level of individuals and genes. So why does this matter? Well, this kind of erroneous thinking can sometimes lead you down the wrong path. Okay, so if you're thinking that organisms will cooperate with each other because that's good for the population, or some trait will be selected because that maximizes population size, that's not necessarily true. We see lots of examples of cheating in natural populations. We'll be talking about this in a few weeks, thinking about how we can traits like altruism, traits like cooperation can evolve when individually it might be better for you to cheat. Ultimately, this can also lead to something called evolutionary suicide as well. Running out of space here, I realize suicide. Evolutionary suicide is a particular example where selection can lead to populations to collapse. So even though it's advantageous for, say, individuals to, there'll be selection for particular traits among those individuals that are, say, cheating or using resources up in the environment, this can ultimately lead to things like population collapse. So evolution isn't always necessarily good for the species, okay? How about evolution is random? Well, evolution isn't a random process. Typically, mutations are random. I'll say typically because sometimes things can be a little bit forced. But evolution as a process is not a random process itself. I had a couple of people say this when I went around the class. Evolution is slow. This idea that evolution always takes place over millions of years, I mean, it does, but evolution can also be very rapid. You know, I mentioned a few minutes ago about lab experimental evolution studies. So, you know, you can take bacteria, you can take viruses and other microbes, you can experimentally evolve them in a lab, and they will, you know, you can track their genetic changes, you can track their characteristic changes, their phenotypes, within the space of, you know, 24 hours, 48 hours. So microbes especially don't necessarily evolve slowly. Also mentioned COVID-19, right? That evolved very rapidly. For examples as well, where you have relatively rapid adaptation as well in mammals and plants. So this idea of evolution always being a slow process is not exactly accurate. Okay, it's maybe formed by the fact that we think about evolution of, you know, our ancestors, you know, our going from great apes into humans, or we think about, you know, millions or billions of years of typically what people talk about when they talk about evolution. Okay, mutations are always bad. Not necessarily. Depends a lot on where you currently are in your fitness landscape. So if you are currently very well adapted to your environment, then typically mutations probably will be bad. But if you're not currently well adapted to your environment, then mutations, they give you the raw materials on which natural selection can act. Okay, so mutations are not always bad. They don't typically turn you into superheroes though. So yeah. What else have we got here? Humans descended from chimpanzees. This is a common one. We have a common ancestor. You'll see this if you were to look at, I'm just going to zoom in here so I've got a bit more space. If you were to look at a phylogenetic tree, it might look something like this. Maybe this is humans. Maybe this is chimps. And this is going back in time, I'll call it millions of years ago. So we had a common ancestor here that we both derived from, but we have not evolved from chimps, okay? We might talk a little bit about phylogenies in this course, but mainly not. That's actually going to be a course in the spring of next year that will talk about phylogenetic trees a lot. Humans are not currently evolving, we are. That's another common misconception, this idea that we've kind of reached some endpoint. We are still evolving. Things like malaria resistance. So in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where malaria is very common, we see a higher frequency of things like sickle cell anemia. And that's because sickle cell confers some protection to malaria. So when infectious diseases emerge in particular, they can impose a really strong selection pressure on human populations. And so we are still evolving. Okay. Did I break down any misconceptions that you might have had, or did you know this all already? Did anyone have any misconceptions about evolution? I've changed your mind about anything. Seen one nod, two nod, and thank you. Okay, good. And that's fine. That's how we learn. Okay, so what are we going to be doing in this course? Well, we're going to be doing mathematical modeling. We're thinking about the mathematics of evolution. But what kind of questions are we going to be answering? I've just put up a few examples here. So the kinds of questions that we can use math to answer are some of these big questions that exist in evolutionary biology. So for example, when will a gene spread through a population? When is it advantageous, typically? We can ask questions about when can species coexist. We see lots of diversity in nature. That could be diversity at the genetic level. You know, there'll be diversity within this room in terms of the different genes that we have. We can talk about that kind of diversity. We can also talk about diversity in terms of different species or populations. When can they coexist with each other? I mentioned peacocks earlier. So we could talk about ideas of sexual selection, but even the question of why does sex exist as a mode of reproduction, right? So it'd be much more efficient if we all just could clone ourselves. It'd be way simpler. We wouldn't have to buy flowers or anything. We could just clone ourselves. And, you know, if everyone was able to do that, we wouldn't have to produce males who bear no offspring, who are costly essentially to populations. So there's often this talk of a twofold cost of sex because males don't bear their own offspring. And that leads me on to why would it be a twofold cost? Well, what is the optimal sex ratio? So, you know, typically most populations, but not all, have roughly equal numbers of males and females. Why is that the case? Again, if females are able to bear their offspring, and we have many species where, say, males may have like a harem, so they can mate with many females. Well, why shouldn't there just be more females than males? Why do we end up with loads of males that don't end up mating with anyone? Okay. Why do pathogens harm their hosts? Surely it would be beneficial for pathogens to evolve to be more benign. They don't harm their hosts. They can live in their hosts for longer. They don't kill them. They're not sick. They can go out and transmit. Why doesn't that happen? This turns out to be all about trade-offs. I mentioned this idea of altruism as well. This is something called Dictyostelium, or a slime mold. It produces a fruiting body. We'll talk about this in a few weeks. So it produces this slime mold. They're individual cells, and they come together in these groups of aggregates of 100,000 cells or something. They signal each other and they form these fruiting bodies, and then some of them are able to sporulate and are able to be dispersed by the wind. The ones that are left behind die. So this is a lot of self-sacrifice. This is a classical model system that people use to study evolution of cooperation. But why do that? Why cooperate? Surely this kind of goes against this idea of what's good for the species versus what's good for the individual. Again, mathematical modeling can tell us something fundamental about not only why does this happen, but when do we expect it to happen as well. Okay. In fact, before I go on to learning outcomes, does anyone have any questions about any of the things I've talked about so far in terms of evolution? No? Okay. So that was kind of the pitch as to hopefully why you should care about evolution. This is why I find evolution fascinating, because we can use math to understand lots of these different questions. I'm going to talk a little bit about hopefully what you should learn ultimately from this course. We're going to be touching on those different topics, but in terms of the techniques and things like that. And then also go into some of the details that is a little bit more boring about logistics related to the course. At any point, if you want to ask me any questions, do feel free to. So by the end of this course, what should you be able to do? Well, one of the things you should be able to do is construct mathematical models across a broad range of different evolutionary scenarios, using different types of mathematical modeling techniques. So we're going to talk about things like population genetics. We're going to talk about quantitative genetics. We're going to talk about evolutionary game theory. We're going to talk about adaptive dynamics and evolutionary invasion analysis. There's different methods that all have their different pros and cons in order to study evolution. So there might be some cases that population genetics is more suited to solving a problem. There might be other cases where it's evolutionary game theory, other cases where it's adaptive dynamics. So you're going to be taught a range of different techniques that we can use to study different evolutionary scenarios. Okay, we can apply these to different biological contexts as well. So things like resource competition, infectious diseases. We can talk about cooperation as well. So we're going to be analyzing these models often algebraically, but also using some geometrical techniques. There are things called pairwise invasion plots, for example, that tell us about when we're going to see different mutants or mutations invading into a population. We'll also be doing some numerical work. So, for example, especially in the homeworks, there'll typically maybe be like one question out of the homework assignments that will have a numerical component. There is also a project I'll talk about later on as well that you might want to do some numerical work for. I'm not going to assume really that anyone has a background in coding though. Can I have it would help if I had a show of hands who has used Python before? Okay, great. So I haven't actually included it on here, but typically if it says in the homework assignments, it'll say something like, write some code for this. You might be able to do it in Excel if you are more comfortable doing that. You can also use ChatGPT or other AI software if you want to help you generate the code. So this is not a coding course, but I want you to be able to understand that we can use code. You can write it from scratch yourself. You can write some of it and have AI to help you. What I really care about is your ability to use the software ultimately in the end. So things like ChatGPT can be very useful for that, and that is fine. Ultimately, it's the output that I really care about and your ability to interpret that, as opposed to writing the code yourself. There is a little slight exception there in terms of the grad students. Maybe I might ask you to actually code the stuff yourself. Finally, this interpretation step, this is the key thing. I'm a mathematical modeler. It's all well and good, seeing some biological phenomenon, making my models, doing the analysis, but then if I can't interpret that back in the context of the original problem, there's not really much point doing it. Okay, so interpreting that and communicating those results to a lay audience or I said a non-specialist audience is key. So there's an element that you want to communicate to specialist audiences who will understand the key things that you're talking about, but often you also want to communicate that to a non-specialist audience. So perhaps think about a friend or a family member who's perhaps not a scientist, being able to say, okay, what am I doing? This is a skill that we should all have. Many of you won't want to stay in academia, and even fewer of you will carry on doing things like mathematical biology, but hopefully that skill in particular will be a good transferable skill, whatever you end up doing in your careers. I mentioned earlier some future options. So we are launching a new biomathematics concentration. This is a sort of multi-year process. Last fall, I taught Math 360, mathematical biology. Mark will give rave reviews for it, I'm sure. This is running again this fall. I'm teaching it. There will ultimately be a number of mathematical biology courses at the undergrad level that can form a biomathematics concentration. I'm not sure if it's up on the website at the moment yet, but there's this course in the fall with me. This will be mainly focusing on population dynamics and ecology. So in this course, we're going to be talking about evolution. But this course here will be mainly focusing on the population dynamics themselves, so changes in population size, things like that. Then this course in the spring, there's another Math 468. Depending on who teaches this course, the actual topic will change. So Aline McPherson has just taught one on stochastic processes in the context of biomathematics. There might be a course on, say, phylogenetics and graph theory and how this tells us about evolutionary relationships. That might be the kind of thing that runs in spring. Also, there's the MAGPIE group that I'm part of. So this stands for Mathematics, Genomics, and Prediction in Infection and Evolution. There are USRA projects that we typically advertise. I know that one or two people are doing those courses. Have done those courses that are going to do USRA projects. And also, if you're interested in grad school as well, feel free to talk to me about any of those things. Even if it's not with me in particular, I can direct you hopefully to people who might be able to help you. Okay. Okay. This is another little bit of a break for you guys. I want you guys again to talk to each other about these three questions. So first of all, why are you taking this course? What do you hope to learn? And then do you have any concerns? Okay, so just take a couple of minutes, chat to the person next to you about these three questions. Okay. So any volunteers, why are you taking this course? If the answer is that you need a 400 level course, I'm not going to be offended. Honesty is fine. It helps me understand what your motivations are. So yeah, any volunteers, why are you taking this course? Yes.
I need a 400 level.
Thank you for your honesty. What's your name? What's your name?
Kisan.
Kisan. Thank you for your honesty. Anyone else who's just taking it because they need a 400 level course? I'm not going to be offended. Yeah, okay, that's totally fine. Everyone has different motivation. I think sometimes this idea that you have to be ultimately really, really passionate about something before you take a course is not always true, okay? People have different motivations and different reasons for taking courses. Hopefully, I might be able to convince you along the way that you can, have a little bit of fun, at least within the realms of math, and learn some new things, okay? So that's totally fine. Anyone else who's not taking this course for purely just because they need a 400 level course? Yes.
I need a 700 level.
Very good. Very good. I like that. Anyone else who's not taking it because they need Zeresh, watch it. 400 or 700 level course. Yeah.
Because you told me to.
Because I told you to. Yeah. Zeresh is one of my grad students, so you didn't have much of a choice.
But also, I will
Yeah.
add, it's related to my research. So
And the same.
Same related to your research. So we've got a few people from the Magpie Research Group who are doing this. Anyone else? Yes.
A couple of years ago, I took an archaeology course on like human origins, and I thought it was really interesting. And then because I do math and I heard about this, I was like, oh, let's learn about the math side of it.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, good. What do you hope to learn? Like, you guys are going to have to be here for the next 13 weeks. Hopefully you'll learn something. So what do you hope to learn out of this course? Is it some transferable skills? Is it about, the actual, subject itself? Is it learning some new things in terms of evolution? Is it learning coding, or, what do you hope to take out of this course? Other than the credits at the end. Anyone? Yeah.
This course will be my first time using Jupyter Notebook.
Okay, yeah.
I want to learn that.
I should say as well, I have no background in Python. I was trained when I was an undergrad doing MATLAB, and you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So I use ChatGPT extensively when writing Jupyter Notebook. So if you are struggling with that, it definitely helps to learn the syntax. So that's one good thing. Anyone else? Any other things you're hoping to learn? Yeah.
Well, I hope to learn some math, some different type of maths which are used in evolution and kind of stuff like mathematics. So I more like to learn some more math.
More math. Okay, cool. And then finally, do you guys have any concerns? Again, this is a safe space. If you have any concerns about any aspects of the course, like, you can obviously talk to me privately if you want, by email or after the class or office hours. But any sort of general things that you're not sure about. Huh? You can, yeah.
Is it, well, there's also mathematical biology, but there's is biology like a huge component of this course, or is it more like math?
That's a good question. So there will be a lot of biological motivation. There'll be some certain terminology that we need to learn along the way. If you're going to be modeling the genetics of populations, we kind of need to know a few things about underlying genetics. Think words like alleles or genetic loci, dominance. These are just terminology at the end of the day, just like you'd have any kind of mathematical definition, right? So there's a certain amount of biological definition. In terms of, do you really need to understand or have a lot of biological knowledge going in? No. I mean, I'm from the UK, as you guys can probably guess. And in the UK, we do typically you do a math degree or you do a biology degree. You don't typically do any courses like pick and choose. And so I did a math degree. And then after my maths degree, I did a PhD in zoology. I hadn't done any biology since I was 16 and then went straight into doing a PhD. And I asked a lot of dumb questions, and that is totally fine. So if you don't understand something about the biology, it's best to just say, what is that thing? It's worse if you just try and say, oh, I don't want to ask or don't want to be embarrassed. I asked a lot of dumb questions, and that is always going to be totally fine. I say dumb questions because I'm being critical. They're not always dumb questions. Any other concerns that anyone might have about anything? Could be the material, could be the way this is going to be taught. It could be about the assessments. There's going to be a project. There's homework assignments. There's midterms. Yeah.
Well, this is the math here is very intensive.
Oh, that's a good question. Is it intensive? I mean, if I'm being honest, probably a little bit less intensive than other 400 level courses, perhaps, mainly because we have this additional component of interpretation in the context of biology. So some of the time that maybe in another course you might spend going deeper and deeper into the mathematical side of it, you might we take a slight step back and say, okay, well, what does this actually mean? So we have to develop that skill set as well. So inevitably you can't do all of things at once. We have to take out some of the mathematical complexity sometimes to take a step back and spend time thinking about the biology. There'll be it should be challenging, but doable. I mean, in terms of the prereqs, if, for example, you did Math 155 and got an A- in that, that would be sufficient for this class. I think most people here probably have done well, actually, that's a pretty good question. Have people done 260? Like, what's people's route into this class? So a few people have done 260. I know a couple of people have done 360. 152. I don't think that was a prereq in the end, but it'd be good to know who was on that. 369. No one did that with Jessica last year. Okay, there's a bit of a mixture there, though that's fine. Any other concerns before we go on? Yes.
So one of my concerns was that, like, how useful this course, the things that we learn in this course would be if I want to like later, like work in as a mathematician or like as a computer scientist, because I'm deciding between this course and another course, but this course seems very interesting, but like I'm not sure if it is actually like applicable things that we can use, because we're not like biologists, and the math we should probably already know.
So yeah, there will definitely be new math, and there's definitely ways of applying those math as often we have in applied math, right? Like sometimes, it might not necessarily be a new thing, like say taking something like a ordinary differential equation, right? Hopefully everyone here can work with an ordinary differential equation, right? But like, how do we actually apply that to a real world problem? Now, whether you're going on to study biology, if you wanted to go on and do grad studies in math biology, that's going to be relatively few people in this room who would want to do that, perhaps. But hopefully maybe someone will be inspired to do that. But you might go on to do problems in physics or chemistry or business, finance. Those are all problems that have some real world component that you might want to apply mathematical techniques to, and then ultimately, do some analysis and then interpret that and communicate that. So those kind of learning outcomes that I mentioned earlier and those transferable skills, a lot of the time as mathematicians, we could be kind of moved around to lots of different scenarios, right? So hopefully those transferable skills, even if you're not going to carry on doing, studying evolution in particular, that those things will still be very relevant. I would say often a lot of the things you'll learn as an undergraduate in particular are, you learn a lot of content. A lot of that content you won't really use in your future careers. It's the skills that you pick up along the way that really matter. Okay, so focus on that aspect, I'd probably say. Okay. So I've got about 10 minutes left. I just wanted to run through some of the course information. This is all on Canvas, but I just wanted to run it through now to give you guys an opportunity to, well, one, because I know you guys won't read Canvas. Secondly, to see if you guys have any questions. So at the moment, it's Mondays, Wednesdays in this room. Wednesdays is a double lecture. I'll try and break that in the middle so that it's not just 2 hours solid. Like I said, currently in this room, I will send out an announcement if we're able to change room, because obviously I appreciate this being over here, especially for those people on that side of the room, is not ideal. Hopefully we can move to a room that's got a projector in it. I'll have office hours after this lecture in my office, K9525. It's on the main corridor going from ASB to the AQ. It's behind another door, but I'll prop that open when it's office hours. Lecture notes, I'll be posting blank lecture notes on Canvas, which you may have already seen. So there's a course schedule page with all the course materials, and then I'll post the completed notes after the lecture. I will try to record the lectures on Zoom. Sometimes technology fails, so I would still encourage you to come to lectures and not rely on those recordings. But for revision purposes and for some people who can't attend, I'll be posting those on YouTube. Like I said, they're intended to aid us in revision, not a substitute for coming to class. In terms of assessments, so there are going to be 4 homework assignments, each worth 5%. The dates of these are on Canvas. The first one will be at the end of, will be next week, and then it will be due the following week. I think I set them on Wednesdays. They're not always on Wednesdays. There's 1 or 2 dates that are slightly different, just to allow for things like the midterm. The midterms worth 20% is on the 19th of June. That'll be on the Wednesday, if I remember rightly. There's a project. I'll talk a little bit more about the project in a moment, but that will be in the last month of the course. And then there's a final exam, which is worth 30%. In terms of those assignments, so, these are going to be regular problem sheets, these 4 homework assignments. Usual rules in terms of late submissions to CrowdMark will be penalized. Usually there'll be about 3 or 4 questions, might take you somewhere depending on how fast you work, it might take you an hour and a half, 2 hours. It might take you less. It might take you a little bit longer. It shouldn't be taking you 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. That's probably a little bit too long. If it's getting to that stage, please talk to me. If I've pitched them too hard or too easy, then you guys aren't going to tell me if it's too easy, so I'll be able to help with the marks. If you're finding that they're taking a really, really long time, please tell me. I'll take on board that feedback and adjust future ones. Okay, so do let me know. Like I said earlier, you can use things like ChatGPT or other AI software to help write code for some of those numerical questions. One thing I would say here is do be aware that the output is not always reliable. Sometimes it will tell you that this is the code to do something, and that is not the code to do that thing. So make sure that you don't, that you actually critique what you've been given rather than just assume that it is correct. Okay. In terms of, marks, I'm going to be thinking about correctness, completeness, clarity, and conciseness. So make sure you haven't got pages of rambling answers. Equally, that things are clear, as well as being complete and correct. I'll talk about this in a moment, but graphs and sketches should be clearly labeled as well. And I talked earlier about this being a cross-listed course, so graduate students, you'll have to do some slightly additional things. The questions, though, I will leave them up there for undergrads who want to do them, and there will be a limited number of bonus marks if you want to do those. So I mentioned clarity and conciseness. I'm just going to give some examples of what I do not want you to do. So if you're drawing a graph of y versus x for something, I don't know why undergrads do this a lot. I'm going to say undergrad students in general, that's a bit unfair. This is kind of the thing I often receive. This is exaggerated a little bit, but tiny little postage stamp size sketches. Please don't do that. Please have nice big graphs that are nice and clearly labeled like this that one can see. Okay, if you make things clearer, it sounds really obvious, I know, but the amount of times that we see things like this, it's really difficult to mark. You might have written the correct thing, but it's not clear. Okay, so make sure that what you write is nice and clear. Equally, on your assignments, suppose you're solving a quadratic like this. And then we often see something like this. Oh no, I've made a mistake. I'll do it right here. And then, let's see, x is 3 or x is 1, and it's kind of chaotic and all over the place, right? Okay, try to write down something that's a little bit more readable. Again, this is all about us wanting to give you marks, okay? Typically, we're not trying to take marks away from you. We want to see, we want to award marks. So the clearer you make your arguments, the easier it is for us to do that, even if you make the wrong choices. So often, maybe people have jumped straight to the end and gone x is equal to 3 or x is equal to -1, say, and then they've gone, oh, there's no workings there. You've made a mistake here. I can't give you any marks for that. Okay, so partial marks will be awarded typically. Try to, include words as well. You don't always have to do this, but, for example, I could describe what I'm doing. So I could say, I'm going to factor this. So factoring this, x is -3, sorry, x -3, x -1. And then it's x is equal to 3, right? This is a lot clearer to understand. I could give partial marks if you make a easy sign mistake or something like that, okay? I often say this to students, try and think of almost your answers as being like a story. There's a beginning here where I'm setting up the problem. There's a middle where I'm doing my analysis and I'm describing what I'm doing as I go along. And then there's an end where I summarize what is my answer. Okay, so think about that narrative when you do your answers. It's a lot easier for us to give marks, okay? Exams, I said there's one midterm in June, worth 20% of the final grade. There's no makeup midterms, okay? If you are ill or there's an emergency, please contact me as soon as possible. I'll discuss any extenuating circumstances. Any material up to the lecture before the midterm is examinable. Likewise, the final exam is for the entire course, okay? So it's cumulative. It will take place sometime in August for the final. And I'll post more information on Canvas as necessary. There is information on there already, like calculator policy and so on. Projects. I said there'll be a project in July, roughly 4 weeks or so from when you'll set it to when it's due. So we typically, as mathematical modelers, have to analyze these real world problems. I've said this already today, right? And we have to report those findings after we've done some analysis. So the project is designed to test those skills. So you're going to be given some evolutionary scenario that requires you to do some mathematical modeling, and then you're going to be doing some modeling and then writing a short report about that, okay? Graduate students, I'm going to be expecting you to present your results to me as a sort of slideshow as well with a Q&A. But if you're an undergrad, you don't have to do that. Okay, a few tips for success, and then we're done for today. So attend the lectures. I mean, obviously you're not children and you don't have to attend the lectures. This is ultimately your choice. You could look at stuff that's in a book. I'll give an example. When I taught Math 360 last fall, those who attended the lectures before the first midterm, on average got, I think it was about 20–25% higher than those who didn't attend the lectures. Correlation or causation, who knows? But the point is, generally those who attend the lectures do better. So I would encourage that. Also, you're paying for your education. You may as well come here and you can ask me questions. Obviously, if you're not in the lectures, you can't ask questions for clarifications, okay? Technology might fail, in which case you don't get additional clarifications and things like that. Please also try to answer questions and attempt exercise in class. You've seen that I like to ask questions. Please do volunteer to try and answer them. Maybe challenge yourself to answer at least one question during the course, even if it's just that. The class will be a bit more enjoyable if it's more interactive. Work on the course outside the class to a reasonable amount. And I am there for office hours as well. So if you have questions or you're struggling, please come and talk to me about it. You can email me if you're more comfortable with that, and try and stay on top of the material as well, okay? If you're having difficulties, please let me know as soon as possible. Don't email me in week 6 and say, I've not done any of the materials so far in the midterms next week, okay? Right, with that, thanks everyone, and I'll see you on Wednesday.